Good evening, I'm Brittany Hobson. We begin tonight in Vancouver, where it's election time for National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. The organization is made up of 640 chiefs from across Canada. They or their proxies are the only ones allowed to vote. Incumbent Perry Bellegarde's mantra over his first term as National Chief is closing the gap. He frequently talks about narrowing the difference in living standards between First Nations and the rest of Canada. APTN's Todd Lamarand looks back at that first term, starting with the excitement a new Liberal government provided.
1 month after his election win, and there was the newly minted Prime Minister in the AFN's grand entry. After a difficult relationship with Stephen Harper, Perry Bellegarde declared sunny waves were now blowing across Turtle Island. Held by, at the time, 2 First Nation MPs serving in Trudeau's cabinet.
We need our people around decision-making tables. That is unheard of, Jody. That is unprecedented. Thank you so much. Again,
having access to decision-makers has been a common theme for Bellegarde over the past 3 years.
Well, we need to have access to leadership. We need to have access to the Prime Minister, to all the ministers.
Critics of Bellegarde's relationship with government say it's too cozy.
But when people say, oh, Chief Bellegarde, you're too close to the Prime Minister, I say it's more a good thing to be close to the Prime Minister because you have access. How else do you bring about change to policy and legislation than through dialogue and having access to the decision makers?
Bellegarde's main motivation for this relationship is to close the gap and narrow the standard of living between First Nations and the rest of Canada. He's been relatively satisfied with the last 3 federal budgets.
I'm going to say we've been pretty successful. $17 billion in the last 3 budgets over 7 fiscal years. It's 3 times what was promised in the Kelowna Accord.
So it's moving in the right direction, but again, making the proper investments. The gap is not going to close in 1 or 2 fiscal years or 3 fiscal years. You need long-term sustainable investments.
The Prime Minister routinely says no relationship is more important to him than the one with Indigenous people.
Thank you for once again giving me the opportunity to share a few words with you today.
And many policy and legislative changes have been promised, something Bellegarde touched on a year into the Trudeau government's mandate.
To ensure Canada's new government keeps its promise of a renewed nation-to-nation relationship based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership.
You know, there is movement, but we always say it's not fast enough. So things are moving in the right direction, but just not quick enough. We still have 40,000 children in foster care.
And a host of other things often brought up at the microphones by chiefs, whether it's better housing, preserving language and culture, or fixing the justice system. This past May, the Prime Minister once again spoke at the Chiefs' Assembly, but now there is a sense of urgency.
Because in October 2019, Canada will have another federal election. And any legislation that isn't passed, it will die on the order paper. So we need to focus and get things done.
And with an eye on the election, it's no surprise other party leaders were invited to speak.
We've got to work with not only the Liberals, but Andrew Scheer with the Conservatives, and Jagmeet Singh with the NDP, Elizabeth May with the Greens. Whoever gets elected as Prime Minister, you've got to have a relationship with and work with them because they're going to be setting policy and legislation.
3 years ago, Bellegarde talked about hope and optimism.
We are being heard, and I believe understood like never before. And that's why, as National Chief, I'm optimistic that we can bring about a change.
This Wednesday will determine if the National Chief negotiated enough change to convince chiefs to re-elect him. Todd Lamarand, APTN National News, Ottawa.
There are 5 candidates running for National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. With more on those candidates, we're joined by host Dennis Ward, who is in Vancouver. Dennis, we've just heard about incumbent Perry Bellegarde's term as National Chief. Who else is seeking the top job?
Yes, so there's 4 other people in addition to Bellegarde that are running, including Russ Diabo, who is from the Mohawk Nation at Ganawage. He's never been a community chief, but a policy analyst for a long time, and somebody who feels that Bellegarde has become too much of a cheerleader for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. There's Miles Richardson, a longtime leader for the Haida Nation. He too feels that First Nations are at a crossroads, and I think many of the people running for National Chief feel that way. And he's picked up some major support in recent days from the likes of former National Chief Ovid McCurdy. There's also former award-winning journalist Sheila North, who's just finishing out her term as the Grand Chief of MKO, representing Northern Manitoba First Nations, and she's considered a real contender here. And last but not least is Sioux Valley Dakota Nation's Catherine Whitecloud, who's been a leader for decades and who is also a former AFN Regional Chief for Manitoba.
What type of coverage can our viewers expect this week?
A lot of coverage. We're going to be doing live hits throughout the days. There'll also be, starting the newscasts every night with some coverage from here at the AFN AGA. Tomorrow night, that's Tuesday following APTN National News, there'll be a special edition of The Laughing Drum with Tim Fontaine. And then on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central, we'll have a special 1-hour live edition of In Focus. And then following the APTN National News on Wednesday, we'll also have a special edition of the news, another half hour, hopefully with whoever is elected National Chief on Wednesday. And then finally, there's also a special edition of Nation to Nation on Thursday following the news with Todd Lamarand.
To follow news coming out of the AFN election, you can visit our website at aptnnews.ca, where we'll also be live streaming it. Thanks for this, Dennis.
Thanks.
As Election Day draws closer, APTN's Tina House talked to some people who will be at the convention and who live in Vancouver to get their thoughts on the convention.
It's the day before the Assembly of First Nations Convention in Vancouver, and crews are busy setting up the main stage area. APTN National News has 5 crews that will be covering stories all week. Dan Kahoko and his wife Ann Noonan traveled here from Ontario.
Oh, I think the week's going to be a fun week, and it looks like there might be some controversy there in terms of possible replacements, but I kind of doubt that.
However, not everyone thinks that spending so much money on the Assembly is worth it. Just a few blocks away sits Mama. She's been homeless on the streets here at this corner of Main and Hastings for the last 3 years, and says that people are in dire need of help.
It would be nice to come and observe what's going on down here, and if you could help, that would be awesome. Spend some of your money on things that are needed in the downtown east side, maybe.
She's hoping that whoever the next national chief may be, they can help create healing centers for those that need it and work towards reuniting people that are down here on the streets with their families.
Either you turn your head or you show some love. That's what a lot of people here are missing, is that love. That the only love that they had was probably from their childhood or their grandparents, their parents, their siblings. A lot of people don't know their siblings.
For Dan Kahoko, he's hoping to garner support from the next national chief on a land claim they've been fighting for years.
Ottawa is where they're going to be based, is in the Algonquin traditional territory, and we're involved in making a claim to the valley, getting that settled, and we're looking for his support, her support, whichever it is, to help us with that.
Preparations are well underway here at the Vancouver Trade and Convention Centre as hundreds of chiefs have traveled from across the country to elect the next national chief of the Assembly of First Nations. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
We want to hear what you think. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/APTN News. Also, you can follow APTN News on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for more Indigenous news. Camp Cloud is still up and running in Burnaby after an eviction deadline imposed by the city came and went. This past Saturday was the day camp members were supposed to leave, but nobody left, and no one came to remove them. Today, water protectors hope they can reach common ground with the city. Our Amber Bernard reports.
Camp Cloud in Burnaby, BC is still standing strong. The city of Burnaby sent them an eviction notice last Wednesday saying they have until July 21st to pack their things up. Well, that day came and nothing actually happened. Water protectors were ready to stand their ground Saturday morning based on what they say is their jurisdictional, inherent right as Coast Salish people.
A peaceful resolution towards their indictiveness for false jurisdiction.
They say they want to reach a mutual understanding with the city of Burnaby. Health and safety are some of the concerns the city of Burnaby mentioned in the eviction notice. But camp members say they're also concerned about the health and safety issues the pipeline risks.
We're both, I think, on the same page that this Trans Mountain pipeline needs to stop, and so we want to really just get back on that page.
Water protectors say they're looking forward to meeting with Burnaby officials later today.
So we have a meeting with Lambert Chu from the city of Burnaby at 4:30 today to discuss the eviction notice.
Overall, Camp Cloud members are staying positive and are prepared to continue their message.
Continue doing as we've always been doing, praying for the water and the animals.
Amber Bernard, APTN National News, Burnaby.
We do have an update to this story. APTN has just learned that the meeting scheduled today with Camp Cloud residents in the city of Burnaby has been cancelled. Both parties hope they can meet later this week. A family in northern Manitoba is rejoicing after their missing son was found over the weekend. More on that after the break. Here's a look at Tuesday's weather forecast starting on the east coast. A mix of sun and clouds and 28 in Charlottetown and Halifax, 25 in Cartwright, 17 in Nain. Cloudy skies for most of Quebec, 28 in Montreal, 23 in Chibougamau. The clouds continue in southern Ontario, high of 24 in North Bay and Sault Ste. Marie. Showers in 24 in Elliott Lake, 25 in Timmins. A cooler day in northern Manitoba, 13 in Pukatawagan and Thompson, 23 in Dauphin, Brandon, and Winnipeg. Sun is trying to peek out in parts of Saskatchewan, 23 in Regina, 19 in Saskatoon, 16 on Tuesday for Meadow Lake, La Ronge, and Buffalo Narrows. A northern Manitoba family is celebrating after finding their son, who had been missing for a month. 26-year-old Russell Hyslop of Lac Bruchette was found midday on Friday. He was in a bush area near the Thompson Float plane dock just outside the city's perimeter. Hyslop disappeared on June 19th in Thompson, Manitoba. He was in the city for a medical appointment, which he missed. His mom, Jeanette Shauli, recalls the moment when her husband told her their son was found.
I just felt, the whole weight off my chest, off my back, and I was just crying in tears because I was happy. I was just, my breathing and everything, it just went so hard, and, just because I was so happy that my son was alive.
The Secwepemc Nation in British Columbia is one step closer to having jurisdiction over child and family services. The federal and BC governments just signed a memorandum of understanding with the nation over jurisdiction. The goal of the MOU is to allow Secwepemc communities to raise their children in their culture. Child welfare responsibilities would transfer to the nation. This follows recommendations by the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
It's true that... And we're all here for one purpose, and that our purpose is our children, or Samamalt as we say in the language. Not only the ones that are here today, but the ones that are yet to come. We'll lay a foundation for them and clear that path for them so they don't lead the life that our people, my parents and grandparents and myself led in terms of the 60 scoop and the residential school. We change all of that.
remember every single birth where there was a child and family service worker waiting outside to take that child. And it has to stop. And we are just so grateful for your leadership, because this is a step forward that many, many other nations will now take, and because of your leadership.
After the acquittal of Gerald Stanley and the death of Colton Bushy, protest camps have been set up across the country. The TP village outside the courthouse in Calgary is still standing, but it's become more than just a camp. Tamara Pimentel met with the camp organizer, who's made it his full-time job.
When Garrett Smith put this camp up 131 days ago, he was a Toronto-based actor, visiting his former home city of Calgary to join a fight for justice.
I left because I hated Calgary and how racist it is, and how there was such a lack of resources for First Nations here. But now that's the exact reason why I'm back, you know, and now that's one of the gaps I'm looking to hope and fulfill.
Now he's back in Calgary permanently. The camp, his full-time job. What started off as a protest is now so much more. The protest signs have been removed, and round dances and school field trips have been held here. It also became a place of grieving as people who continued to face injustices walked out of the courthouse. But Smith is thinking bigger.
All these buildings around here, there is really nothing for First Nations to identify with. And we're hoping to kind of fill that gap by providing something like this all across the city.
Smith is working with organizations in Calgary like the Friendship Center to come up with spaces to practice Indigenous spirituality, to create community gardens and engagement sites, and find a space for the homeless.
I have two people here that consistently have been staying here in the tent here that I've allowed to kind of take over. A lot of our homeless people out there suffer from the residential school issues and trauma that they incurred, and the shelters remind them of residential schools. There are cots, they're lined up next to each other, right? You know, exactly the way that they were in the residential schools. And these teepees are something that should be utilized in the actual healing process for our peoples.
While he stays at the camp, Smith spends time writing proposals to the city, which he says has been fully supportive of the camp staying here in the middle of downtown. Next week, the camp is meeting with organizations to start making Smith's dream of expanding a reality. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Calgary.
Time for another quick break. Coming up, a look at the healing powers of art. Here's a look at the rest of Tuesday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. Cloudy skies and 18 in Peace River and Grand Prairie, 20 in Lethbridge with light showers, 23 in Medicine Hat. A sunny day on the west coast, 28 in Victoria, 30 in Campbell River, 27 in Smithers, Fort Nelson, and Dease Lake. A warm day in the Yukon, 29 in Beaver Creek, 31 in Dawson. Much of the NWT is under the sun, 27 in Fort Simpson, 26 in Watee. A high of 29 in Fort McPherson and Inuvik. In Nunavut, a cooler 9 degrees in Arviat, 22 in Repulse Bay, 9 above in Clyde River, 5 in Arctic Bay on Tuesday. Welcome back. The Great Northern Arts Festival, held each year in the Northwest Territories, attracts artists from many walks of life. Charlotte Mork Jacobs sat down with two of them who are using their craft as a way to heal.
I didn't get any more visits, so my little girl was allowed to make phone calls with her from jail.
Not only is Karen Naglow open about her drug dealing and using days.
I would leave my 12 to 13-year-old daughter looking after her little baby sister for days on end, and I would send cabs up with milk and diapers or whatever.
She is also an artist at the 30th Annual Great Northern Arts Festival in Inuvik.
Take a picture.
She sits beside a student, sharing her story, now sober and healing through beading.
And it helped me keep grounded and focused. And as an addict, my head is just like this, and my hands need to go all the time. Can't sit still.
But sobriety has had many challenges.
You know, it's funny as addicts, right? Our pride, we'll phone anybody and everybody for $2 all day long until we have enough to get dope. But we're complete strangers. But to ask somebody to help you, couldn't do it.
She says it was her rekindled relationship with her mother that helped her earn back lost time she spent behind bars.
She started to reteach me how to bead, and just taught me little tricks, you know, how to cut a thread at an angle so you can easily thread it.
The festival has grown to include more than 24 northern artists, many of whom use art as a form of healing.
Our idea of art at the time was to sit around in the Eskimo Inn and wait for somebody to check on what was happening at the festival, and if somebody was successful in selling one of their works, and that person would be buying the next rounds.
With a margarine container holding paints, Antoine Mountain is able to express himself through art.
As soon as the person is allowed to have a little bit of time with the arts or even on the land, then that connection is reestablished with their own traditional roots.
Although Naglo has a long way to go in her healing journey, she says it's art gatherings like this one in Inuvik that bring her one step closer.
I feel really empowered, and it just makes me feel really good to create beautiful things, you know, because my life has been so ugly for so long.
Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Inuvik.
There's a new video out showing another example of humans not properly respecting wildlife. This video was taken Sunday on a highway south of Jasper, Alberta. A black bear was on the side of the road. Dozens of cars pulled over to take a look. Some tourists got out of their cars for a look, and a bear charged towards one of them. Parks Canada recommends if you want to look at the bears, stay in your vehicle. They're also reminded to stay a safe distance from the animals. People are trying to figure out how 2 bear cubs wound up on an island in Estonia. The cubs surprised a family living on the island when they wandered into their backyard. It's unusual because until now, only one young male bear was believed to live on the island. No other bear cubs had ever been spotted before. The family believes the cubs were probably looking for food and were lured by the smell of the family grilling meat. One of life's mysteries. That's your APTN National News for this Monday. For the latest on the Assembly of First Nations Annual General Assembly, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Brittany Hobson. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.